Well, welcome back to Conflict of Interest. Tonight we're talking about Afghanistan, the conflict in Afghanistan. And we're joined tonight by Professor Richard Tanter from the Nautilus Institute at RMIT. And as I said, he's the co-author, or one of the authors, I think, of the Australia-Afghanistan Briefing Book. It's a very helpful online publication which talks about the conflict. I said to Peter before the break, Richard, I think the fundamental question here is how long is this conflict going to go on? It's now been going since 2001.
Yep. Well,
is there an end?
If you listen to the Dutch and American and sometimes the Australian military, they talk about being there for another decade or even 15 years. That's inconceivable. The real question is how is it going to end? And if you talk to the military again, or the military talks about killing the Taliban, well, that's basically impossible. So
why is that impossible?
Because you're talking about half of the country, basically.
Okay,
and how are you going to get there?
If they're terrorists?
I mean, really, what you actually find is that if you read the Pakistani and the translated Afghanistan newspapers, or even the public reports, there's a lot of accounts of local truces. These are people who've been working with each other tribally for a long period of time. Yeah. So it's not inconceivable to think of political resolutions in a way in which in Iraq it's actually very hard now.
Yeah, but the real problem with the future in Afghanistan is the difficulty of Pakistan, and particularly the northern parts of Pakistan and Afghanistan, where you've got the leakage of Taliban in and out of Pakistan, well, the Americans attacking Pakistan.
The war is now across the border. We have an Afghanistan-Pakistan war now.
And the Pakistani government is not going to wear that. I mean, that's where the future problem lies.
Well, I mean, it's not a matter of blame pointing, but we've created that. I mean, the pressure on the immediate past president of Pakistan, the kind of pressures they're under now, the fact that tribally the border doesn't matter.
Yeah, of course, it doesn't exist.
In the Pashtun parts.
It doesn't exist.
So it really requires a rethinking of what are the potential objectives of the war that have been conducted.
How many Australian troops have we got there?
We've got about just under 1,100 now.
So we've actually got more than we had in Iraq.
Yeah, that's right.
But as Peter mentioned earlier, we talk a lot less about
Never talk about Afghanistan.
Well, there's very few media there.
Yeah.
Journalists, even Australian journalists with the ADF, are no longer taken on patrol. It's too dangerous.
Too dangerous. So no embedded journalists.
Or not from the Australians anymore, not permanently there.
What a pity.
You get
could
some...
send the Age and the ABC out there.
Well, the New York
Times...
Times...
some real life.
Well, the New York Times.
New York Times, I'd be in favour of that.
You get to New York Times.
I'd vote for that.
It is in fact possible to find out in English. There are good Pakistani newspapers. The web does that. Our mainstream media are, in this case, really letting us down. A few of the commentators are beginning to cut into it, like Dan Flitton at The Age.
Yeah.
But we don't have people there. We're not listening to the Pakistani coverage. We're not listening to the English language Afghani coverage.
I agree.
Yeah.
And I mean, you say, you make the, I think, facile point, there's no journalists there, and that's the problem. But in fact, there's plenty of journalists in Pakistan. Yet it's still not really being reported back properly
well, it's partly
in the West.
It's what the editors are asking for. I'm sure that's part of it. But go back to your question about how long we're going to be there. Yeah. I think in reality we will end up leaving. The British left, the Russians left.
So the British are out, the Russians are out?
I mean, in terms of the long term, which
they
remember.
Yeah.
How long with the
over
British
the last
there?
150
they're
years.
still talking about the line that the British set up.
Right.
Between
Pakistan
but
the British and the
100
Russians are both,
so.
I think the experience was that they found the conditions in the end just impossible.
Well, the Russian experience was unbelievably awful, particularly for the grunts who were fighting
because the Russians were just incompetent.
Well, they were incredibly brutal about it as well. But their political objectives were, in certain way, not that different. It was control. And the question
they're your
mates. Why are we obsessed
with
Afghanistan?
lefties, the Russians are your mates.
Why are we criticising them? Why are we obsessed with Afghanistan?
Well, that's the question that I find personally very puzzling. In a very weird way, you can actually work out a strategic rationale for being in Iraq, controlling the oil, blocking Iran. I don't agree with either of them, but you can work it out.
Oh, and getting rid of Saddam Hussein.
The only rationale in Afghanistan that is conceivable is the long-term competition for Central Asian oil, which is now a very big deal. But there's no way in which that a war in Afghanistan is going to yield any kind of stability that the Americans want. So the question is really, when are they going to get out? And I think probably both sides are going to be waiting for that in Afghanistan.
Let me ask you this: Russia.
Yep.
Russia surely must feel they'd be on America's side in Afghanistan.
Why?
Well, because they've just entered a brutal war in Afghanistan, and the Americans have really taken over. Surely they'd feel that, and this would assist them in controlling their oil and gas reserves in Central Asia.
My guess is that the Russians really want the Americans out precisely because they don't want anything which leads to further instability in those ex-Soviet provinces, republics to the north, Tajikistan, Uzbekistan and so on, Kazakhstan. That's where the oil action is. And secondly, Iran doesn't want anything more because the refugees are spilling over. The main drug routes go through.
All right. Well, let me ask you about another country, Pakistan. What are Pakistan going to do? How is it going to deal?
Pakistan is very likely going to implode.
Do you really?
I really think that. It's even before Musharraf fell, the northwest frontier was a no-go zone.
It's just collapsing.
Zone. The Americans are going over the border. Bush has, allegedly, according to the reports, given a command saying we don't care what the Pakistani
hot pursuit, it's called,
government says. Sooner or later there will be some fight between the Pakistani army, which is both nationalist and has its own, dog in the war in Afghanistan.
And Pakistan also, of course, has nuclear capability.
Well, so I can say, where are the nuclear facilities in relation to this? They're in the north of Pakistan, aren't they?
Well, I don't actually know physically where they are.
People keep saying that.
And I doubt, no, they're not near the northwest frontier.
Okay.
And that is, that's the key issue, both direct physical security of those Pakistani forces and the possibility, think of it from an Indian position at the moment. You're beginning to get terribly nervous.
Yes,
and that's what worries me, is there's no rational reason for Australia to be there. There's no strategic interest. The means by which we're pursuing our objectives are counterproductive. The Afghani parliament has called for the withdrawal of American forces. President Karzai has said stop the bombing. We're bombing more, not we, but the United States, because we don't want to put more ground troops in there.
But you guys opposed the Americans' entry into Iraq because there was no UN resolution. And you all said if there was a UN resolution, it's okay. There is a UN resolution.
Actually, I wrote an article called Against the Security Council War in Afghanistan. So I'll have you back on that one.
No.
Next week.
Well, you're just trying to be difficult. But
of course.
But now the left generally, like you, Greg, New York Times, Age,
I'm
ABC,
pleased to be
the media in
that's
Australia.
Great. I'm now on the same level as the New York Times. That's fantastic.
They've got their bloody resolution. They've got their UN resolution. You can't win. Why don't they?
What do you mean? What's your point?
Why aren't the left happy about being in Afghanistan? Because they are there with a God-appointed UN resolution.
Well, I think a lot of people, as I said it in the first segment, I think a lot of people after 9/11, when the US had some goodwill around the world. Hang on,
just people.
The left was, perfectly well, the left was divided at that point.
I'm not discussing people, I'm discussing the left.
And in fact, things have moved on. There is now a war which is at least as brutal as the one in Iraq, and it is time for both a strategic and moral reassessment of it. The left actually isn't doing very much about it at the moment. You're quite right. We don't have a peace movement.
What's wrong with them?
Because
where's the peace movement?
Well, why don't you start one?
Where are the marches?
Let me see if you agree with this statement. Here's a statement by Barnett Rubin, who's one of the world experts, as you know, on Afghanistan. He says, "Right now is the time when there is the least hope since the Taliban were overthrown. The worst security and the least belief by Afghans that actually this intervention is going to bring them a better future."
I think it's exactly right.
Yeah.
All the reports I see, that's what you see. Certainly the better American strategic analysts like Anthony Cordesman give you very good reasons to expect why that's so militarily. You read people like Ahmed Rashid, the Pakistani journalist, the best person probably from that region writing in English. It's very clear that Karzai is really in a hopeless position.
How long will Karzai last? If Karzai goes, what happens?
There's an election coming up within the next year.
Yep.
He is probably the most important thing the West's got going for them there politically at the moment. I have no idea of the electoral dynamics of Pakistan or Afghanistan in these conditions. If he goes, then certainly the Western's position will be much, much worse.
Okay, well, what happens if the Western forces or UN forces pull out?
Yep.
What happens? What's going to happen to Afghanistan?
I think you've got a very good chance then of some kind of political dialogue, conflict. Political dialogue between people who have been living with each other, who have social relationships with each other, which are endured tribally for a long time.
But that's a euphemism for saying people have been killing each other for centuries.
No, it's very different.
They've always fought.
Well, it's very different from the kind of deep hatred between Sunni and Shia in Iraq that we've lost.
You don't have that. The Kurd, Sunni, Shia.
What we are concerned about is stopping terrorist bases there. And what any government in Afghanistan that emerges, the West will have many, many levers to stop the export of terrorism.
Yeah, but I don't think you can do that. I think you've got to clean up northern Pakistan at the same time. Do you?
I think you've got no chance of what you call cleaning up northern Pakistan. I think what you're doing is dealing with the long-term, this is getting another argument, long-term results of colonialism, which will take a long time to sort themselves out.
All right, well, look, we've got to wind up there. I could go forever on this topic, and I'm sure you too. It's fascinating.
Layer upon layer.
But we do have to wind up.
Thanks for coming in.
Thanks very much.
Thanks for talking.
And we'll have you back.
Thank you.
Thank you. We have to have a short break.